Hi, I'm attorney Eric Lewis with Lewis Legal Services in Indianapolis. Today I have an update with the new national means test numbers that were recently released by the Department of Justice and that go into effect on April 1st, 2025. The means test is used in bankruptcy to determine eligibility in Chapter 7 cases where the majority of the debt is consumer debt as opposed to business debt or non-consumer debts. In Chapter 13, the numbers are used in part to determine how much you're expected to pay back on your debts in a reorganization repayment plan. In Chapter 7 cases in which the majority of the debt is consumer debt, it helps determine eligibility based on your current monthly income and expenses and comparing that with state average family income values that vary by household size. For Chapter 13 cases, it also helps determine what we call the commitment period, whether your Chapter 13 repayment has to be a minimum of 3 years in duration or 5, and how much you can reasonably pay back on your debts in the determination of disposable income. I've linked below where you can find these numbers, not only for Indiana specifically, but for all states and jurisdictions. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at these changes.
So, effective April 1st, 2025, for consumer bankruptcy cases, these are the new numbers. The last time these numbers were revised in November, we were happy to see at that time that they went up from the previous adjustments in April 2024 and November of 2023, where we saw some sporadic downward adjustment depending on the family size. These changes aren't huge, but for some people they make the difference between qualifying for a Chapter 7 or having to do a repayment plan of some kind in a Chapter 13. For the first time in several cycles of these updates, I'd say at least the last 3, we've finally have a little healthy increase in each family size, which reflects growing incomes. And so if you're new to this, the way it works is if you're an individual filing bankruptcy and your debts are primarily consumer debts and no applicable exception applies to you in terms of mean testing, such as current service in the military, for example, then you have to take a means test analysis. And the means test looks at your income for the 6 calendar months prior to the calendar month in which you file your bankruptcy case. So when we average that income and annualize it, the question becomes, where does that average put you in relation to these cutoff numbers? If your average is below these numbers, then there's no further analysis in terms of means testing. If your average is above these numbers, then further means testing is required to look at your specific expenses and judge your ability to pay back your debt, even if just in part. So, for example, in Indiana, let's say you're a married couple with 2 children. As a household of 4, your combined gross income as averaged over the last 6 calendar months would need to be less than $9,400 a month in order to trigger a means test analysis, which is, as you can see, $9,400 a month is the same as $112,796 per year. That's gross income per year for a family of 4. So if your income is over that mark, even by $1, then it triggers a full means test analysis that looks at your reasonable and necessary expenses and then makes a determination as to whether it would be appropriate or not for you to file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. On the expense side of this analysis, the means test uses certain standardized numbers that we call the national living allowance, which is pretty much just based on your household size. There are other expenses, of course, that you can take in a means test for Chapter 7 or a determination of disposable income in Chapter 13, numbers that are unique to you, such as what you do in terms of charitable contributions, retirement contributions, what you pay for life insurance or health insurance. But some of these numbers, as you can see, they're set by law, and there can be some deviation for necessary expenses, but this is the expectation. And these numbers apply to all consumer bankruptcy cases, not just cases filed in Indiana. So for means test analysis for eligibility, determination of disposable income in Chapter 13, or just looking at the general reasonableness of your budget on Schedule J to your bankruptcy paperwork, the court looks at these numbers as a guide to determine if your deductions from income are both reasonable and necessary. And here, Although the Department of Justice has revised the median household income numbers, the means test numbers for typical household expenses are not changing at this time and will remain the same numbers that went into effect in May of last year. And that's crazy to me because we all know how much literally everything has gone up and continues to go up. So while we look at these numbers and they do seem to take account for rising incomes, I'm not sure how or why the corresponding lack of rising expenses isn't considered to be a major factor. What I take away from this is the increased median household income allows for more people to get their foot in the door for Chapter 7, which is good for those that need it. But for those that trigger that means test analysis because they make more than that median household income, the expenses that they can take is limiting and ultimately making them pay a significant more amount of their disposable income to their creditors in a Chapter 13 proceeding.
All right, another thing I want to make clear about the means test is that simply being over median income doesn't mean that you don't qualify for Chapter 7. This is a common misconception. The triggering of the entire means test analysis does, however, shift the burden for you to prove that it would not be what the bankruptcy court calls a presumption of abuse for you to get the relief that you're asking for in not paying your creditors and getting a Chapter 7 discharge. Some people can exceed the median household income and still qualify for Chapter 7, but it's very circumstantial and specific to each individual situation. That's it for today. If you have any questions, please contact my office. If you want to stay up to date on developments in bankruptcy law and other related things, please click subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.